फिस्कल डेफिसिट के टारगेट को 4.1 को हमने सुधारा ही है।
The Modi government's first anniversary media blitzkrieg kicks off. Government sources say with a fiscal cushion of 45,000 crore rupees, a fiscal deficit of 3.6% for FY16 is possible, but the buffer may be used to increase agri spend instead.
और इसमें दोनों प्रकार की प्रक्रिया, डिसइन्वेस्टमेंट भी और स्ट्रैटेजिक डिसइन्वेस्टमेंट भी, जहां-जहां आवश्यकता है हम लोग अपनाएंगे।
North Block gears up to roll out a massive 50,000 crore rupee divestment pipeline. Strategic sale of government hotels on the cards. Centre also plots a subsidy rationalization program, which it terms as a bloodless coup.
Centre hopes to put the confusion over FDI and online retail to rest. Sources say top government leaders are in favour of more foreign investment. The finance minister says UPA's move to allow FDI and multi-brand retail stays for now.
State Bank of India posts a solid set of fourth quarter numbers. Profits jumped 23% as Treasury gains surge. Bad loans see a sharp decline. The stock takes a beating as the company is now saddled with restructured assets of over 12,000 crore rupees.
Cigarettes to FMCG major ITC disappoints the street with its Q4 numbers. Cigarette volumes declined for the 8th straight quarter as revenues rise a mere 0.6%. Profits also jumped by just 3.7%.
Bulls keep the bears at bay on the Laurel Street despite a late stutter. Sensex plus with 28,000, the Nifty nears 8,500.
Raghuram Rajan launches a scathing attack on the easy money policy of many global central banks, cautions it may create deep instabilities, also accuses select nations of stealing growth by depreciating their currencies.
Special court grants bail to Congress leader and industrialist Naveen Jindal, former Jharkhand Chief Minister Madhu Koda and 12 others in a coal block allocation case, but the court observes charges as serious and bars the accused from leaving India.
The Coal Ministry bats for the auction of coal linkages along with the third phase of coal block auctions. 23 coal mines identified for sale and 12 will be set aside for the power sector. That's another exclusive.
The formalities are over. Jayalalitha, all set to return as Tamil Nadu's Chief Minister tomorrow, meets the Governor after current Chief Minister steps down.
There's a very strong incentive in countries to try and steal growth from each other.
We are finding tremendous support around the world to be able to invest in India's infrastructure.
India is now poised in a very favorable situation to take advantage of the global scenario.
मैं ये नहीं कहूंगा कि अच्छे दिन आ गए, अच्छे दिन आने की शुरुआत हो गई है.
When you are trying to revive the economy, some indicators can always be patchy.
Well, less than 100 hours to go before the Modi government celebrates its first anniversary. The media blitzkrieg has well and truly begun. The Network 18 dialogue had top government ministers debating their first-year performance. All of that coming up for you on India Business Hour. Good evening. Thanks very much for joining us here on the show. Hi, Nandara.
Good evening, Shireen. The government going all out to highlight its achievements. Going to be coming out with that 175-page docket as well. And apart from that, we've got a big show, heavy-duty earnings, and a scathing attack from the RBI governor on the quantitative easing by many central banks.
Well, that's right. We've got a packed show lined up for you, but let's kick things off with the day's trading action. The bulls held the upper hand in early trade today and most part of the day, but the bears did create some flutter in late trade. The Sensex crossed 28,000 in intraday trade, but then fell below that mark thanks to some profit booking in the last hour. Ditto for the Nifty, both the indices ending with gains. Mid-caps also managed to hold on to their gains for the day, so ending on a positive wicket there for our markets today. Meanwhile, the Bombay Stock Exchange has reconstituted the benchmark Sensex index, replacing Tata Power with Lupin. And onto the currency market, where we saw the Indian currency posting some smart gains today to end the week on a high. The rupee is shut sharp at 63.52 to the dollar, posting a gain of more than 10 paise in trade today. But the big story tonight, the number 2 man in the Union Cabinet spent a few hours this morning highlighting the achievements of the Modi government in the past year. Finance Minister Arun Jaitley said his government deserves top marks for creating an atmosphere of hope where there was gloom, of linking India's foreign policy to its economic agenda, agenda and providing a corruption-free administration. Dismissing criticism that not enough is changed on the ground, Jaitley blamed broken private sector balance sheets and an NPA-burdened banking system for holding back fresh investments. Sapna Das says the priority in year 2 is to roll out the GST, push through the land bill and focus on reviving stalled infrastructure projects. The team at North Block out in full force to list out the achievements of the Modi government. Speaking for about an hour, the finance minister said the biggest achievement of his government was decisiveness in the face of obstructionism and a cohesive strategy to pursue growth and development. The macro picture has certainly improved with the twin deficits under control and inflation in check. In fact, sources say the government may have a buffer of around 45,000 crore rupees because of the reduction in the fiscal deficit to 4% versus 4.1% and higher excise duties on fuel. This could be used to hike spending on the agri sector and on irrigation.
आने वाले वर्षों में कृषि के क्षेत्र में विशेष रूप से सिंचाई में और रूरल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में सरकार का खर्चा बढ़ाना, पब्लिक इन्वेस्टमेंट बढ़ाने से ही दिशा बदलेगी, इसकी नीति स्पष्ट है.
The finance minister is hopeful that the recent uptick in indirect tax collections becomes a trend. And by the time of the next budget, he may also be ready with the first cut in exemptions to the corporate sector as part of the plan to bring down the corporate tax rate to 25%.
One, as far as corporation tax or corporate tax is concerned, we must here also remove discretions, so phasing out of exemptions and bringing the effective rate down to global levels. उससे इन्वेस्टमेंट भी प्रमोट होता है और इन्वेस्टर के पास सरप्लस पैसा भी रहता है इस देश में और इन्वेस्ट करने का.
Aiding the finance minister's fiscal roadmap is the subsidy rationalization program, combined with pure disinvestment and strategic sales. According to Jaitley, a 50,000 crore rupee disinvestment pipeline is ready for rollout, while strategic sales of government hotels is on the cards. And sources say government shareholding in ITDC properties may well fall below 51%. While on subsidies, the latest numbers point towards 12.5 crore subscribers of LPG cylinders under Pehel against the earlier 17 crore users. This points towards a reduction in leakages and hence the subsidy payout by the government. The minister says leakages in the fertilizer subsidy are also being plugged.
पिछले कुछ महीनों में जो फर्टिलाइजर के संबंध में भी हमने निर्णय किया है कि किसान को तो सब्सिडाइज्ड रेट पे मिलेगा, लेकिन उसकी भी जो लीकेज थी उसको कम किया जाए.
Jaitley says his hands are full for the coming year as he gears up for the rollout of the goods and services tax, seeks cabinet approval for the corporatization of ports and pushes ahead with the bankruptcy code among other reforms.
The government is also trying to put the ghost of MAT notices behind, although the finance minister has indicated that they will wait for the judicial process to resolve the issue despite the constitution of the AP Shah panel. In New Delhi, Sapna Das.
The media blitzkrieg beginning with North Block. The government also plotting a bloodless coup to rationalize subsidies. In fact, in an exclusive conversation with CNBC TV18, Expenditure Secretary Ratan Vatal said the centre is working towards a formula for sharing the kerosene subsidy. Do you remember, after petrol and diesel were deregulated, LPG cylinders are now being sold at market rates. Kerosene, however, left out of that ambit.
All the products which are being marketed, including LPG, they're all market determined. Even the gas cylinder which you buy, you're paying a market price for it. And the government decides to make a cash transfer, give you a subsidy.
That's right.
Now we have provision for that in a budget line.
22 plus 8,000.
Yes, yes. Kerosene, there is the issue which you're saying that we are discussing a formula. Kerosene is something which is given to the states. We are looking at that area.
Well, a bloodless coup is how the finance minister has described the subsidy rationalization, expecting some significant savings on that front. Now, even as the finance minister has reiterated the government's push towards reform, the one major concern for India Inc. is the government's take on allowing FDI in multi-brand retail and B2C e-commerce. The finance minister has said that the previous government's policy on FDI and multi-brand retail stands, something that is being seen as a climb down from the BJP's position that FDI and multi-brand retail should not be allowed. But what's also interesting is the fact that CNBC TV 18 learns the government is looking to clarify on the definition of various forms of retail which could pave the way for FDI to be allowed in the B2C e-commerce space. Ritu Parnabhuyan joins us now with the details. Ritu, we understand that top government officials actually back the idea of FDI in e-commerce.
That's right. It's not only officials, but even NDA functionaries who spoke to CNBC TV 18 have told us that they are not against the idea of FDI in e-commerce. In fact, they want more clarity on this issue. Firstly, they believe that the scenario regarding retail that has changed over the years. E-commerce has reached into places which are not serviced by malls or brick-and-mortar stores. Moreover, FDI has already come into many of these companies engaged in e-commerce, and the government would not want to stop investments coming in. In fact, they would not want to actually, dissuade investors from coming into this sector. But for that to happen, there has to be clarity on what constitutes retail. In fact, we understand that the DIPP and the Department of Consumer Affairs, they are trying to work out definitions for retail, wholesale retail, as well as e-commerce retail, and the Cabinet Secretariat may also intervene and may give specific responsibilities to one of these department to basically finalize the definition of retail. In fact, Finance Minister was asked about the government's position on issues related to multi-brand retail and e-commerce, and this is what he had to say today.
The sector itself is undergoing a significant change. And therefore, this debate will have to be ultimately analyzed in terms of the change which is undergoing. I have said so in the past that in this sector, the largest retailers in the world now don't have a retail store. And therefore, we have to pause for some time to see how the impact of these technologies on the sector itself phases out in the next few years.
That's the Finance Minister explaining that given the change in context with the e-commerce boom and the global players being in India, we should look at the FDI policy with respect to that. More news from North Block. Minister of State for Finance Jayant Sinha is in Tokyo to attend an investor conference. CNBC's Kari and Joji caught up with him and began by asking him about the key hurdles India is facing in bringing in global investments. Here's a slice of that conversation.
Number one hurdle in which we are hearing consistently, not just from Japanese business people, but business people around the world, is the quality of India's infrastructure. Whether we look at our ports, our highways, the traffic in our cities, the availability of power, we have to do a tremendous amount to bring it up to world-class levels.
And what will you do over the next 2 to 3 years to bring it to world-class levels?
We have already laid out, I think, a very ambitious plan of public investment in our infrastructure. This year alone, we have stepped up investment in railways, in roads, in ports, in bridges by somewhere in the region of $50 to $80 billion. So that is happening on the public investment side. And of course, we are finding tremendous support around the world to be able to invest in India's infrastructure.
Now, you have one of the most open FDI rules in the world. Why haven't there been more investors taking advantage of this? I
think they are taking advantage of it. If you look at what's been happening in terms of both FDI flows, which are up 40% since our government came to power, as well as foreign portfolio flows, which are also up dramatically, you'll find that foreign investors are flocking to India because of how open our government is, how open our regime is, along with, obviously the very attractive growth prospects going forward. So whether it is SoftBank that's saying that it's going to put $10 billion to work in India, whether it's Ford that's opened up a huge factory in Gujarat, whether it's Amazon that's investing $2 billion in India, across the board you see some of the world's greatest companies, most global companies, really upping their ante as far as India is concerned.
Now, the one concern that keeps coming into the discussion when I speak to CEOs about building a bigger manufacturing base in India, and I know India has this Make in India program, is the labor restrictions, and they find that very restrictive, so to speak. Now, the government seems to have given that mandate to the individual districts rather than to take a government approach. Was this a deterrent in some ways for some manufacturers? I hear from them that they wanted a more sort of comprehensive government-led approach.
We want a more competitive labor policy for sure. And because our states, which are, the size of countries, I mean, Gujarat itself has 60 million people, Uttar Pradesh is 200 million people, the size of Brazil. And because they are at such different states of development as well, it's very important to give them the freedom to be able to experiment in each of their own domains as to how labor law should evolve. And that's really the federal approach that we have taken.
Well, that's the Minister of State for Finance, Jayant Sinha, in Tokyo. Remember, the infrastructure trust that the government had proposed in the budget, we understand from sources the modalities are being finalized, and Jayant Sinha will be tasked with finalizing the same. As we continue our coverage of the first-year anniversary of the Modi government, Network 18 held a dialogue in the capital today, which included top ministers and politicians. Addressing the gathering, Railway Minister Suresh Prabhu said the government has had to work hard to change the perception of India as an investment destination. He's also confident that railways will play a major role in growth revival. Remember, the kind of capex that has been allocated to the railways through the budget is unprecedented, and he is also hoping that foreign investors, more maybe bilateral funding at this point in time or multilateral funding, will start to show up for the railway sector. Take a look.
Japanese have the capacity to invest. China has a foreign exchange reserves. They could invest. US, of course, is a net debtor, but still has the capacity. The corporate world has the capacity. The European companies, so they will be looking out for investments into the markets like India, which is going to grow. And at a time when India needs also to supplement the domestic savings which had fallen over a period of time to actually make this thing happen. So India is now poised in a very favorable situation to take advantage of the global scenario. Privatization presupposes कि आपकी जो more than half of the equity or at least management control ownership you transfer to some other company. Is it something which is ever envisaged in India for the timing, at this particular point of time? When the railway is a government of India department, railway is run in a way that it has so many social obligations, so many issues to be related to that. Can the railway as an entity as it exists today, can it at this moment of time, could you even contemplate privatizing it? Not a single committee has also recommended it.
So no question of privatization of railways, also talking about the change in sentiment when we talk about India. The Yatadin promised by the Modi government have only just begun. That's the word coming in from Telecom Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad, who spoke at the Network 18 dialogue. Prasad admitted the broadband highway for rural India is an ambitious project, but one that must be achieved. Listen in.
In a population of 1.25 billion, India will have 1 billion mobile phones. What a game-changing exercise it would be. Urban density telephone की 147% है, 148%. Rural 44% है, हमको बढ़ाना है. And the international studies show, I had gone to South Korea also, which is the top in this whole league. A country having greater broadband has a direct impact on the GDP. तो आज इस देश में हम ब्रॉडबैंड कल्चर ला रहे हैं.
Well, that's the telecom minister talking about the achievements in the past year in making the digital India dream a reality. So what do economists, industrialists make of the Modi government's first year in office? I spoke with some top economists and industry leaders earlier in the day. I started off by asking Adi Godrej to rate the government's first year performance.
I think the 12 months of the government have gone off very well. I think the finance minister enunciated it extremely well. Clearly, most of the macroeconomic issues have been sorted out: fiscal deficit, current account deficit. The rupee has stabilized. Our total foreign exchange reserves have risen. So overall, I think macroeconomically, India is in a very good position. As far as on the ground, things are recovering, but they are a little slower than expected. But I expect in about 2 quarters, we'll be back to very strong on-the-ground functioning. And if the goods and services tax is passed and implemented by 1st of April, I expect we can be in double-digit GDP growth in the next financial year. So overall, I'm very happy with the way the year has gone, and I think the government is doing a very good job.
Okay, you're saying double-digit growth if the GST rolls out on the 1st of April 2016. But Mr. Godrej, you talked about a revival as far as the investment and capex cycle is concerned 2 quarters down the line. Once again, I go back to what our sources are telling us within government, that, you know, there is a problem of broken private sector balance sheets. There's also a problem of the banking sector having been squeezed as far as NPAs are concerned. But now the finance minister is saying that it looks like the downside or the down cycle for NPAs, this could perhaps be the bottom and we could see things improving. We've got a credit policy coming up on the 2nd of June, and I know that the government is very keen that the Reserve Bank should act more aggressively. What is your own expectation now, sir?
I think that there should be a reduction in the repo and reverse repo rates. I think clearly wholesale price index is now in negative territory. The CPI is also going down. International global commodity prices are in reasonable control, so I think it would be the right time for the Reserve Bank to further reduce the repo and reverse repo rates. And I think overall growth is going to accelerate. So generally the country is in good shape, and we must remember that already we are the fastest growing major economy in the world today. We are growing ahead of China in terms of GDP growth rate.
Yes, you're absolutely right on that front. This is the first time that we're growing higher than China in terms of the GDP growth rate. But let me go across to Soumitra Chaudhary. Mr. Chaudhary, a lot of achievements being highlighted there by the finance minister: subsidy reduction, rationalization, social security schemes, addressing the fiscal situation, improving the macros, infrastructure spending, defense procurement norms being rejigged. What, to your mind, has been the single biggest achievement of this government in order to get the economy restarted, stabilize the economy, and get growth back?
I think the single biggest achievement of the government is actually being in the government. I think that has, in a sense, changed the ground conditions and created conditions for, let's say, a break with the last 3 years of the UPA, which unfortunately saw the slowdown beginning. However, Mr. Modi's plan seems to be more long-term, or more, let's say, more medium-term. So the initiatives that he's really focused on, like Make in India and such like, isn't going to yield dividends overnight. They really are 2 to 3 year plans. When they come out, they'll be very good. So I think some of the expectations people had that there would be early recovery, very early and very sharp recovery, got belied. I think there is the possibility that it might have happened, but since Mr. Modi's, I think, essential approach was that he would like to do it a different way, and that different way then takes time. And there were certain things that inherited 3 years of a bad economy, bank balance sheets being bad. I think one of the comparisons that can be usefully made is Mr. Modi's first year and the UPA 1's first year. UPA 1 actually had been in government. Manmohan Singh had been finance minister. In a sense, they were going to continue the old way of doing things. It did give very good results, and I think they were far more familiar with the terrain. Bank balance sheets were actually quite strong. Corporate balance sheets had also become strong. I think this time around we had banks stressed books. We had corporates in stressed books. And also this team, he wants to do it in a different way, and I think they haven't been in government very long enough. So I think the first year is a bit of finding out, trying out a lot of new things and getting some things right, and some things maybe getting it right the next couple of years.
Let me get Atsi back into the conversation. Atsi, on the basis of what you've heard from this government, the focus on structural reforms, again something that the finance minister was talking about, and Mr. Chaudhary was also discussing the implications of that in the long term. And perhaps one aspect that hasn't been talked about significantly is this entire piece as far as subsidy rationalization is concerned. LPG, perhaps the move towards kerosene being brought into the direct benefit transfer loop as well. That is something that the government is working on at this point in time. Structural reforms, long-term implications of that, and what would that eventually mean as far as ratings are concerned?
Sure. Let me start from the back as to the implications for the ratings. Now, if you look at, we're talking about 1 year since the government took office. This is not the only government that took office about a year ago. Last year, Brazil had elections, South Africa had elections, Indonesia had elections. So many sort of comparable emerging markets also brought in new governments about a year ago or so. India, when you compare what has happened in India over that 1 year, India actually compares quite favorably to what's going on in Brazil, South Africa, even Indonesia to some extent. So I would say that, when we look at India, we look at it in comparative perspective, and that's one of the reasons we have a positive outlook on its rating. To your point about specific policies, yes, one of the reasons why India is now rated at the lowest investment grade level, that's Baa3, is because its fiscal deficit is much higher than most comparable countries. Yes, it grows faster than most comparable countries, but it also has a very large government debt burden. So anything that occurs that could sort of assuage this fiscal deficit would definitely be positive. And I think, again, here, India is showing creativity. We know that the tax revenue base is low. We know that some expenditures are rigid. So the extent to which the government can make those expenditures more efficient, that would certainly help. And I think that that would be very credit positive. But again, I'm in the camp that believes that, look, the near-term problem for India was macroeconomic. It was the current account deficit. It was the fiscal deficit. It was inflation. That's been handled in the near term. Structural reform is a long-term process. You're not going to see the results in 1 year, much less, it's probably going to be 3 to 5 years before you actually see the results.
Absolutely. It is a long-term story. But Siddharth Sanya, let me bring you in on the conversation as well. You've been listening into what the other panelists have had to say and, of course, what the finance minister has said. What, to your mind, would go down as the single biggest achievement of this government's performance in the last 12 months?
Well, I think a big success of this particular government had been in its approach. It didn't really attempt any quick fix. It didn't really attempt to walk down the beaten down road of populism. So first of all, it was easy for when there was an expectation of a big uptick in growth in the near term as well as on the over a period of time. They didn't really try to boost growth immediately by indulging into fiscal indiscipline. That was a big achievement possibly to start with. Later on, in the more recent times, when there is some kind of question about or more challenges to the political capital of the government after the big defeat in Delhi election, question marks around the upcoming elections, say in Bihar, they are not really talking in terms of indulging into any form of populism. Rather than that, they are sticking to the long-term plan of growth and development and boosting the long-term growth potential of this particular country. And if you notice what they have done over the period of last 12 months, I think there are a good number of measures which actually boost the long-term potential very significantly. And that's possibly, in terms of a framework, the best to adopt if you really care for a 3-year and 5-year growth and not so much about the next 3 months.
So consensus there that it's been a strong start by the Modi government, but a lot more needs to be done. There is no time or place for complacency. But with that, it's time for us to wrap up this edition of India Business Hour. There's plenty more to discuss when we return with the trading action and, of course, the government's continued efforts to highlight their achievements of the year gone by when we resume trade on Monday. From all of us here, goodbye. Many thanks for watching.